All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Last Week in America, a series where you and I can connect to discuss the news and the culture of the United States of America. My name is Blake Center. I am the new host of Last Week in America. Some of you out there are regular viewers, may be aware that this series has not aired for some time, but the American Center in Moscow is delighted to have this program back on the airways and to connect with you today. So whether you're here to learn more about current events or to discuss American culture or simply to practice your English listening skills, we're glad to be with you today. So if anyone is with us, or perhaps for those watching this streamed after the live streaming, I'd like to start with a question. Have you been to the USA? And whether you have or haven't been to the USA, which American cities would you like to visit? As I said or suggested in the beginning, I'll be hosting this program for some time, so it'd be nice to get to know some of you regular viewers, get to know your experience with the US, and just sort of test the general base of experience. So let me know in the chat to the side, and then we can interact. But in the meantime, while you're letting me know, if you've been to the USA and where you might like to visit in the USA, I'll tell you a bit about myself. So I am from the southeastern region of the United States. And you can see a little map here. I'm from the state of Georgia, and more specifically, the capital city of Georgia, which is Atlanta, seen there. And this is one of America's major cities, as I said, the capital. And you might know that Georgia is referred to as the Peach State. Perhaps obviously because agriculturally based economy, or used to be at least, and we are known for like, high quality peaches. But it's kind of funny because in America, the term Peach State is not all that accurate to refer to Georgia, because in fact, this adjacent states of South Carolina and Florida actually have much better peaches. They're sweeter, they're juicier. But what is kind of interesting about Georgia is it has this strange soil that we call red clay. And because of the various minerals making it up, it just grows a particular kind of peach. But moving on to more interesting things. Let's see, Atlanta, like I said, it's my hometown. And it has a vibrant cultural scene. Maybe some of you have been to Atlanta, or you might like to visit. But you might know that Atlanta is the world capital of rap music. So if you listen to rap music, let me know in the chat. Let me know some of your favorite artists. Maybe some of them are American, and maybe some of them are even from Atlanta. But the history of rap music in America, you might be familiar with it. It sort of merges the earthy realism of American literature on the one hand, and with the blend of urban cultures that America has grown over the past couple of centuries and a bit more. So today, as you might know, more rap music is written in Atlanta than anywhere else in the world. So when I was growing up, actually in the suburbs of Atlanta, that is just the sort of the outskirts of the city, famous rappers lived in my neighborhood. Their children went to school with me. It was sort of commonplace to interact with them as members of our community. And the rap music scene, as well as the country music scene, which is kind of like a folk music, were ever present in Atlanta life. But the other interesting thing that you might not know about Atlanta is a lot of people are thinking of Atlanta as this new Hollywood. And you think, well, new Hollywood, what does that mean? What a strange thing to say. Well, the thing is, it's recently become one of the biggest American cities for film and television. And of course, you might know the news network CNN was founded in Atlanta. But there have been some huge developments recently that have led many to argue that Atlanta is, in fact, the new Hollywood. And why is this? So, California as a state has very strict regulations on business and they have very high tax rates. And for this reason, a number of production companies are actually leaving California and coming to Georgia, where the business regulations are less strict, the tax rates are lower. And because of that, many production companies, people that make the movies and TV shows that we watch around the world, are moving from Los Angeles to Atlanta. So every now and then, when you drive down the street here in my hometown, you'll drive past these big movie trucks, and you can see sets, that is movie sets, occupying coffee shops or buildings or parks. So it is something that I personally see on about a weekly basis, and it's become all the more common over the past year. So I'm looking in the chat here. I see Dimitri mentions that yes, Atlanta is the city where the Olympic Games were hosted in 1996. We still have the infrastructure of that here, similarly to the infrastructure that is in Sochi. And so there's a massive Olympic pool at one of the universities, which the buildings of which might actually be pictured on this slide, Georgia Tech University. So they still have the aquatics facilities. We have a number of monuments around Atlanta to commemorate the 1996 Olympics. And let's see, looking at some other comments here in the chat. Interesting. Someone comments that they hear that California produces the most peaches in the U.S. Are any people from Georgia jealous of this? Yes, absolutely. And is there a rivalry? Yes, absolutely. I think that's interesting to hear about California. I'm no expert on, American agriculture or like the rates of peach growth compared between states. But that's surprising to me that California is so productive. There is, however, like I said, definitely a competition between Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, which are all neighboring states, all have similar cultures, and there's kind of a playful competition as to who grows the best peaches. But we'll move on here. Just a bit more about me, and not to talk about myself, but just to kind of give you a tour of the United States and where I've been, especially in the Southeast, which we've discussed. So after Atlanta, I went to college at the University of Virginia, which you can see pictured here on the bottom left. And interestingly, the university was founded by this man depicted in the statue right here in front of the building. Some of you may know who that is, and that is Thomas Jefferson. He's one of America's founding fathers, and he was actually our third president, among many other things. But he's someone who looms large in American history, and about whom the University of Virginia is especially proud. And I studied political science there, and then moved to Washington, D.C. And you can see on the right, this slide here, Capitol Hill. There I worked for the Senate, and as you know, the Senate is the upper chamber of our federal legislature, and there are 100 senators, meaning there are two from each of the 50 states in the United States of America, and I worked for one of those. So you probably recognize this photo. As I said, it's the home of our federal legislature, and it includes not only the Senate, which you can see here on the sort of left wing, it's split down the middle. So on the left side, the left chamber is the Senate, and on the right side is the House of Representatives. And it is somewhat interesting because you might hear the term in the news, Capitol Hill, and you can see just from this picture, that the building that houses the federal legislature is situated on a hill. And that's pretty simple, I suppose. But in casual speech in DC, Capitol Hill refers to not only the geographic area in the city, that is the place where the Capitol building is, where some of the supporting office buildings are, and where some of the residential areas are within Capitol Hill area. But Capitol Hill also is synonymous, or at least is used synonymously with the legislature itself. So if we were talking, I could tell you that I work for the Senate, but I could just as naturally tell you that I worked on Capitol Hill. So when you hear in the news, there are debates on Capitol Hill, et cetera, they mean that they are going on in the federal legislature. And if you hear someone saying, I lived on Capitol Hill, that probably means that they lived in the area, perhaps they worked there. So a bit of nuance to that terminology. But this geography is a really beautiful thing. Again, please comment if you've been to Washington, or if you would like to go to Washington. Let me know in the chat, because when you do, I highly encourage you to approach these steps right here. Assuming it's not a restricted area, which it was when I was last in DC. But I encourage you to stand on these steps. You would have your back facing this big building. And the reason you would do that is because this gives you an amazing view of the city. You'll see on the next slide that I have the way that the city is structured. But if you stand on this hill and on these steps, you can look out onto quite a lot of Washington, D.C. And in fact, you'll be able to have a clear view of other landmarks that are in perfect alignment with the Capitol, such as the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, as I said, all sort of lined up. And this area is called the National Mall. It's a vast space that houses government buildings, beautiful monuments, many of which are in a neoclassical style, sort of thanks to Thomas Jefferson, who bore a great architectural influence on early American design. But also because this National Mall takes up a very large portion of the city, and it's sort of the central location. And just to close the loop on my biography, I am no longer working for the Senate because I'm a graduate student at Moscow State. And if you have any questions, let me know. Maybe some of you are students at Moscow State or students in Russia. So let me know in the chat. So again, have you been to Washington, D.C.? And regardless of whether you've been to D.C. or not, which American city would you like to visit? I know that D.C. is a great one. I enjoyed living there for 2 years, not least because you have this amazing view from Capitol Hill, which we just discussed. So you can see it in this picture here. This is sort of depicting where the statue is. It's sort of the base of the Capitol Hill area. So several yards in front of the steps that we saw right here on this slide. And looking out onto the National Mall, that grassy area and beyond, you can see the Washington Monument standing tall. And then in the distance, if you look at the bottom right base of the Washington Monument, you'll see to the right, as I said, a set of pillars. And what you're seeing is actually the edge of the Lincoln Memorial, which is, of course, a monument to American President Abraham Lincoln. So great place to visit. And let's see, people are saying in the comment that they would like to visit Washington. They dream of visiting it. That's great. I highly encourage you to. Let's see. We'll move on, but do let me know in the chat if anyone else has been to DC, and also which American cities you'd like to visit. That'd be interesting to know. Oh, but I see Yuri has been to DC 5 times. That's awesome. Kudos, Yuri. Very cool. Also, let's see, someone else commenting. What are you majoring in at Moscow State? I'm majoring in, technically the degree is called post-Soviet public policy. But from an American perspective, what this amounts to is a mix of international relations and Russian studies. And this is a mix of topics that's very hard to find in the United States. And this might be more information than you asked for, but here goes. The whole reason I'm going to Russia in the first place is because I'm, interested in understanding Russian culture better. One of our legendary diplomats in America encouraged some Americans to go to Russia to sort of get Russian mud on their boots, so to speak. That is to really get to know the culture in a deep and intimate way. And that's why I'm studying at Moscow State. That's why I'll get over there soon. And that's why we're talking today, to build mutual understanding and get to know each other better. So let's see. Before we get to the news, perhaps we can discuss an interesting topic. Let's see. So you might know what American Southeasterners or Southerners generally are like. You've probably seen them on television or in movies, and you probably know that they have a funny way of speaking. So people in the southern part of the United States, especially Georgia, where I'm from, also Tennessee, where my relatives live, and also Texas, which is our biggest state, as you know. They have a very different way of speaking. And like I said, you've probably seen these people in media depicted as cowboys or as farmers, like the one photoed here. But what's funny is as Southerners, our English not only sounds different, it also includes words and phrases that simply don't appear elsewhere in the United States or in the English language, which I think is funny. When I was younger, my accent was somewhat strong, as a child. But having lived in close proximity to a major city, Atlanta, and then moving to Washington, D.C., and also go to university, my accent has sort of worn off a bit. Because America has many metropolitan destinations, as does Russia. So I feel like over time there is less and less of an accent in America. But nonetheless, in the South, there's a pretty particular kind of accent. So let's discuss it. Let's see. Of course, like I said, it's less common around big cities like Atlanta and Dallas. But in the rural areas, this is still very common. If we go, I'm in the suburbs of Atlanta right now. If you go about 15 minutes from my house, you'll hear people with thick Southern accents and using the slang that we're about to discuss. So it still exists and it's still strong, just not typically near the cities. So when it comes to Southern slang, we can start with something simple. This one's famous. It's the word y'all, which is really just a combination of two words, you and all. So you use this to address a group of speakers or a group of individuals or something of that nature. But what's funny is few visitors to the South or to America might know how to use y'all. So it's, like I said, it's meant to address more than one person. So if you're talking to a large group of people, you can emphasize that by saying y'all, as in, how are y'all doing? Or hope y'all are doing well, something like that. And the next one, this is a real deep South slang phrase, down yonder, which you don't hear much near the cities, but when you really go into the rural areas, or you could say into the sticks, then you hear this one quite a lot, especially in the state of Arkansas and in Tennessee. But it's pretty simple. Down yonder means over there. So if someone asks you, where is the nearest gas station? You could respond, it's just down yonder, 5 miles up the highway. So the last one is pretty funny. And you could use this one a lot if you wanted to kind of be sassy in the United States when you visit, or if you just want to impress your friends in Russia. And it's especially popular among the older generations in contemporary United States. So my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, that is to pitch a hissy fit. And this, again, is pretty simple. To pitch a hissy fit simply means to throw a tantrum. So it's often used for children, who are in a bad mood, but even adults can pitch hissy fits. So as I'm seeing in the chat, some of you have been to America, some of you would like to go for the first time or to return soon. But I encourage you, next time you go, try to impress the local Americans with your brilliant knowledge of Southern slang now. It's something that is very rare among foreign speakers to kind of get that deep level lexicon integrated. But it would be a fun social experiment, or at least you can impress your friends in Russia with your newfound Southern slang. So let me go through the chat, and while I do that, I'd like to ask you, what's your favorite Southern slang? Maybe it's one that we've discussed today, like y'all, down yonder, or pitch a hissy fit. But maybe there's something more that we haven't discussed. Maybe it's something that you saw in film, on TV, or that you heard a Southerner say when you visited the United States. Let me know in the chat. All right, looking through your comments in the meantime. Let's see. Vladman has never been to DC, but his dream is to visit. He's going to LA and San Diego. Ooh, that's great. LA and San Diego are beautiful. I think you'll really like your visit. Yes, Texas, Dimitri, Texas is also great. I do know Galveston, as you asked. Galveston was several years ago especially popular as a tourist destination for Southerners. But I believe it was in the 20th century was virtually destroyed by a hurricane. So as I understand it, much of Galveston is newer than other parts of Texas. But yes, to see such a popular city like that experience such hard times because of a hurricane is it's terrible. But yes, Galveston's still popular today, especially among Americans in the Midwest and in the South. Let's see. Someone asks, are the accents in the Southern United States different from each other? Can you tell people, say, from Texas and Tennessee based on their speech? Yes, very good question. Yes, you can. So the Southeast it covers a lot of territory, and some of that territory was added over time. So because of settlement patterns and developmental peculiarities, these places do have different accents. So the people in Georgia, and I would say Georgia and South Carolina sound somewhat similar. But the accent is, here's actually a good clarifying example. The state of Tennessee. I'll go back to my first slide, so just so you can see what Tennessee looks like. You can see it's this red state. Capital is Nashville. And you can see that Tennessee is a long state. It's very wide. It extends from east to west. So what's interesting here is about half of Tennessee is technically considered to be in the Southeast, and the other half is closer to what you might say is the Midwest, though a lot of them still think of themselves as Southerners. What's interesting is in the eastern part of the state, that is the side near Atlanta, they sound, as you might imagine, quite a lot like Georgians and South Carolinians. And a number of these people, they speak more slowly and they stress their vowels a bit more. Whereas if you go to the West and Western Tennessee, people tend to speak quickly and have shorter vowels, and they kind of elide their words in a kind of mumbling fashion. And you'll have to look this up online to see a different examples of Southern American accents on YouTube, but at least to a native speaker, the difference in accent is very noticeable. And I think even for you non-native English speakers tuning in, I think even you will be able to notice some of these differences in accents. So I encourage you to look it up. It should be interesting. Let's see, looking through the chat. Let's see. Someone asks, would folks say that the northern states understand what down yonder means? I think so. I think a majority of them would understand, at least based on context, but they would probably make fun of someone for using it because a lot of this Southern slang is quirky, it's kind of hokey. So if you were, if you use the term down yonder in New York City, to describe where Broadway is, then you might get some pretty strange looks. But if you say it, in my area, it wouldn't be seen as strange at all. It might be seen as a bit outdated, maybe, in the sense that you might think of something that your grandparents or your parents might say. But even then, I think that northern Americans would understand what you mean, but they might look at you sideways because they might think it's a bit strange. Oh, this is a good one, a good comment here. Someone says, I love how they use ain't. That is AIN apostrophe T in informal speech. It's definitely Southern slang. It's the combination of are and not. So you could say, for example, you are not Southern, or you could say you ain't Southern. But of course, it's technically not a word in the English language. So your English teachers, your language teachers would, chastise you in class for this. I remember even in elementary school growing up in Georgia, some kids would use the word ain't, and the teacher would say, "Oh no, students, we can't use that." So it's frankly a habit that a number of Southerners have to break out of because it kind of rolls off the tongue. It's very convenient to say ain't rather than are not. It's not least because one syllable versus two, but yeah, very, very common, especially in the Southeast United States. So with that, let us move on to the news. As you all probably know, this Monday was Columbus Day in America. And of course, other nations and states celebrate Columbus Day around the world, though in varied forms. But in America, it's celebrated as an annual national holiday, and it's even a federal holiday in the United States, which means that various government employees might get the day off. Sometimes school might be out, depending on school districts. And as you might know, it celebrates the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus and his arrival to the Americas in 1492. In fact, during this age of discovery, Columbus led a Spanish expedition to find a new route to the far east. Back then, of course, Europeans were looking for new trade routes to India and what they would call the Indias, which is sort of like what we understand Indonesia to be. But these trade routes were opening up and being discovered. However, at the time, map making was not as advanced as it was today. So Christopher Columbus actually used an accurate map that depicted Asia to be several thousand miles longer than it actually was in reality. And this inaccuracy led Columbus to not arrive in the Indias, but to arrive on a new continent, or what to Europeans was understood to be a new continent, though Columbus, of course, was not the first person to visit the Americas, nor even the first European to discover the Americas. But nonetheless, in the popular imagination, Columbus is understood as the man who discovered America But as you can understand, that's a very funny and even controversial thing to say. Um, and on the point of the Indias, this is the reason why many Americans refer to native populations as Indians, and some older American histories even refer to indigenous peoples as American Indians. And this is something that is quite controversial in America today. This terminology, and really, it extends from Columbus to making a mistake, not actually arriving in the Indias, but after even realizing his mistake, that is, he arrived on a new continent, persisting in calling these people Indians nonetheless, sort of stubbornness on his part. And it is controversial, even today in America, to use the term Indian or American Indians to refer to indigenous peoples. Especially over the past few years, it's become quite controversial because the term is not only historically inaccurate, as we've discussed, but also because many understand the term to be disrespectful to indigenous peoples of America, many of whom were, severely oppressed under European colonization. So that leads us to our next point here, that, of course, it's historically important that Columbus and his crew's arrival in the New World initiated the colonization of the Americas by Spain. But in the following centuries, other European powers joined suit, and this led to the transfer of plants, animals, culture, human populations, and technology between the Old World, or what they thought of as European civilization, or maybe even Eurasian civilization, and the New World, which was the Americas. And for that reason, it remains incredibly historically important. But normatively or morally, it's still very charged. In fact, for this reason, Americans have celebrated Columbus Day as a federal holiday since 1971, but the holiday's name is becoming exceedingly controversial. In fact, this year on October 8th, the United States President Joe Biden proclaimed that October 11th, that is the second Monday of October, or Columbus Day, would instead be recognized as Indigenous Peoples Day by the federal government. So Columbus Day was still issued a proclamation, as is tradition, that acknowledged it as a federal holiday. And it also recognized, the contributions of Italian Americans because of Columbus' Italian heritage. But the proclamation was meant to mark October 11th as a day to honor Native Americans, or we would say indigenous peoples, as well as, quote, their resilience and their contributions to American society throughout history, even as they faced assimilation, discrimination, and genocide spanning generations. Let's see, looking in the comments, a few of you are chiming in. Aline asks, are there special ways of celebrating this day, like traditions? In popular American culture, not really. No, it has virtually no religious trappings or celebratory trappings, really. Growing up, we thought of it as a day off from school, and some people who are adults today think of it as a day off from work. But I think that I think outside of the Italian American community, Columbus Day is not something that's particularly viewed with pride or celebration, but more just recognized as pretty. Honestly, it feels like an insignificant holiday on the calendar. It feels like a day off from school or a day off from work. And that's not to diminish the importance of the holiday to Italian Americans, to American history, or the controversy of the holiday for indigenous peoples and other Americans. But it is just to say that it's not understood to be a huge deal, as the day comes on the calendar for most Americans. Um, let's see, Vladman, Vladman's production asks, what are the peculiarities of this holiday and celebration? Um, Again, very few peculiarities in American popular culture, though it is somewhat different for um, the Italian American community, which is quite proud of an historically important Italian such as Columbus. I don't know exactly what they do, um, though I have seen photos, small scale parades in small towns, likely in the Northeast United States, where many Italian communities are located. Um, so, the bottom line is we don't actually celebrate Columbus Day. At least most Americans don't, as you might celebrate other holidays. But in practice, it kind of amounts to a day off from school or work, and as of late, importantly, a day for reflection on our on the United States history, um, the various negative aspects of that history, how we deal with remembrance of these negative aspects, and so forth. But as many commentators will tell you, um, the controversy over Columbus Day and whether the holiday's name should be changed to Indigenous Peoples Day is part of a broader effort to, or conversation, I should say, to consider erasing or revising or forgetting or otherwise reconsidering, re-examining negative episodes in American history. Again, this is a very sensitive subject, but it's quite important to understanding Columbus Day and to the way that America deals with its history generally. For example, you can see on the bottom left a statue of Robert E. Lee, who is the general of the Confederate States of America, which you all likely know from the United States Civil War. There's a statue of him being removed, and I believe that is in Richmond, Virginia. But nonetheless, the South for many Americans is associated with slavery. It's associated with secession and disunion, and it's sort of become a symbol of things that Americans generally don't like about their culture, things they might be ashamed of. But of course, for a lot of Southerners and also any Americans, it's not necessarily the case that they are proud of Robert E. Lee, that they're proud of the history of slavery, et cetera, but they're more concerned with what it means that these symbols of their local history, of their heritage, that they're being removed. There's a kind of a concern that that these might be bad episodes in our history, no doubt, but is it dangerous to forget them or to revise them? What does that say about American memory and the way that we deal with history? Of course, here's another popular symbol on the bottom right. That's the flag of the United States, the Confederate States of America. And you'll note that many citizen activists have taken action themselves. So this is someone just, vigilante of his or her own initiative, climbing a flagpole and taking down a Confederate flag. This is not a city employee who has some sort of authority to do this. This is just a concerned citizen climbing the flagpole and taking down the flag because it is a symbol of the Confederacy and in many people's minds, thus racist tendencies, slavery, very negative aspects of American history. But again, the debate is quite charged, and it's also evoking a reaction among many Southern Americans and others, because you take these symbols away, then these people, Southerners in particular, will claim, well, these constitute parts of our history, our identity, and then they'll react. So while you see some people lowering the Confederate flags, taking down Confederate statues, there are many people who are arguing to proliferate these things. On the one hand, there are folks that will raise Confederate flags over their property. Driving throughout the South, you can see people doing this along the highways so that they're visible to other people, but especially over farmland, you'll see these flags raised. And that's not to communicate necessarily that these people are supportive of the negative aspects of this history. It's more an assertion of the identity. It's more a political position in the debate of whether these symbols should stay or go. But there's also some pretty thoughtful analysts who are arguing that, well, we should not remove these controversial symbols, but instead put them in conversation with others. So, for example, you might leave standing the statue of General Robert E. Lee, like you see here, but you might also have a monument nearby that memorializes the enslaved laborers, many of whom worked the agricultural economy around the Virginia area. So that's just something to bear in mind. And these questions are difficult to answer, but I'm curious, do you believe that monuments should be removed if they're deemed offensive? And would you want your state celebrating Columbus Day? Just curious on that. There's no right or wrong answer, but just curious how you think Americans are understanding this as well. But let's move on to something that is also quite interesting. A number of you are likely tracking this. The Facebook sort of scandal over the past several days. As you know, Facebook is the world's biggest social media network. And on October 4th, Facebook and its sister apps, including Facebook Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp, they were knocked offline for 6 hours. And these platforms were offline, at least ostensibly, because of a maintenance process that went wrong. But there were further complications. You and your friends probably noticed this in real time, along with billions of others who couldn't access the apps. I certainly did because I use WhatsApp to communicate with my classmates in university. Now, here's an interesting point. In the English language, we have a term that you might know or you might not know, the term whistleblower. And the way that we mean whistleblower is it's quite a general term that describes someone who reports waste, abuse, or corruption to an authority that can do something about it. But in the wake of Facebook going offline last week, a whistleblower came out from Facebook, and her name was Frances Haugen. You can see her pictured on the right, depicted as if she is, aggravated with Mark Zuckerberg, and perhaps rightly so. Mark Zuckerberg, of course, being the CEO of Facebook. Anyway, the day after these social media were temporarily offline, this whistleblower, Frances Haugen, a former Facebook employee, testified before the United States Congress. And Haugen told the US Congress a number of bad practices at Facebook and its sister apps, from promoting eating disorders among users to endangering democracy. And the bottom line in all of this is that Haugen is expressing to Congress and to the American public and even to the international public that Facebook deliberately puts profits over protecting its users. So Haugen essentially argued that if Facebook was simply a large company that people depended on to communicate, that would have been bad enough. But this massive company on which people depend to communicate, also profits from the personal data that its users provide in exchange for Facebook services. So the bottom line is that people rely on apps like Facebook, but these apps make money by collecting users' personal data. And worse, it's not exactly clear which data Facebook and others are collecting and to whom they're selling this data for a large profit. This perhaps explains, the question that Congress asked Haugen: is it time to break up Facebook? Or does Facebook constitute an anti-competitive model? And is it time to break Facebook up into smaller companies that would be less able to harm its users, intentionally or unintentionally? And as you could imagine, these events have revived a long-going debate among the American public and, like I said, the international public too, regarding the concentration of personal data. So the economic argument is that as long as the company is growing, it should be allowed to keep growing. After all, it's creating jobs and growing economies. But jobs and economies did not exist outside of social and political contexts and would mean nothing if societies collapsed or more likely are simply unhealthy or unstable. So the justification for allowing indefinite growth of a business might not be as strong as some economists have argued, particularly when the evidence that Haugen has provided suggests that the company Facebook and others are not willing to change course, to change their business practices that harm consumers and harm societies. So for this reason, just to finish this slide, is one of Haugen's most powerful observations. It's an important takeaway from her testimony to before the US Congress is that, quote, until incentives change at Facebook, we should not expect Facebook to change. That is, the incentives that drive the company, like any other, are based on the logic that companies must grow indefinitely, and that all growth could come at the cost of that growth. The indefinite growth would be good, even if it does ultimately harm some of the users. But as Haugen demonstrated, this is something for revived debate. It's something that we have to decide as a nation, and it's challenging many of our more foundational assumptions about how our liberal economy should work and consumer rights, anti-competitiveness, etc. So we'll move on. Just curious, what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of social media? I know that's a simple question, but we could say that while a site like Facebook or Instagram helps us stay connected with friends and family, big social media sites might actually contribute to psychological problems such as depression and anxiety, and they might concentrate users' personal data in a way that could harm citizens. And of course, I also ask this because, the slightly more sensitive American debate focuses on another question, and that is, should the state regulate the media to prevent profit-seeking practices from harming users? I'm sure a number of you are using apps that are sort of gamifying their functions. Gamify means to make the app sort of addictive, like a game. It works on a reward system that makes you use the app longer or more frequently. Maybe that's something that needs to be regulated. That's something that our Congress and our public are discussing pretty actively. So let's see. Just a few comments before we move on to our last topic. Facebook is often connected with the Telegram or with Riddle. they can destroy the whole social network. Yeah, it seems to be the case. I mean, this outage knocked not only a number of apps offline, but that means a number of users can't access them. So I think users' dependency on these apps is quite concerning. I agree. Aline says, when this happened, I thought my Wi-Fi router broke down. Yeah, me too. I thought there was something wrong with my phone, but it turns out, yeah, all of these apps were offline. And it's funny because, it was difficult to find out that they were offline at first, because a way that you might ask whether your WhatsApp is down is, to text a friend via Messenger or DM someone on Instagram. But all of these apps were knocked offline at the same time. Someone asks, has there been any backlash against Zuckerberg and Facebook in general in the wake of the Haugen revelations? Yes, it did look pretty bad for Facebook. I understand that there has been some backlash, but frankly, I'm not well informed enough to, explain it in a clean way. So I encourage all of our viewers, do your part, go read the news on the subject. Maybe we can talk about that during our next meeting in 2 weeks. It's certainly something that will still be in the news, still be very interesting. And yeah, it could be interesting to discuss that next time. All right, so leading into our last topic, just a few more minutes, as I said, I'll go ahead and ask you a couple of questions. I'll be going to the theater this Friday for the first time in 2 years, probably like many of you. And I'll be seeing the new James Bond, No Time to Die, which I'm pretty excited about. But I would love to know, when did you last see a movie in theaters? How long ago was that? For me, it was 2 years. For you, maybe longer, shorter, but let me know. And second question is, do you plan to watch a movie this weekend? And if so, do you plan to watch it in the theaters or at home? So let me know the last time you went to the movies, and if you plan to go see a movie this weekend. And while you let me know, I will cover a few topical points. So what's interesting is in America, theaters are reopening. And that's pretty exciting because there were a number of temporary and even some permanent closures amidst the pandemic. Simply, lots of people had to watch movies from home. People were using Netflix and other streaming services. So a lot of Americans are excited to go to the movies again. But what's funny is things are different this time. It's going to the movies right now in America seems to be motivated more by a sense of nostalgia and occasion, because during the pandemic, most Americans have been watching movies at home because theaters have been closed. And a lot of Americans have found this to be more convenient, maybe even more enjoyable way of watching movies. So blockbusters that would have been released in theaters and watched in theaters were simply ordered from the comfort of people's living rooms and streamed via televisions and computers. So it's quite funny now. Now that movie theaters are reopening, it's sort of a special thing to go back to movies. People are getting excited. With theaters by my house, I'll give you an example. I was sitting at a cafe just the other day, and the cafe is located next to a movie theater, and I was watching people go in and out of the theater, excited to go see movies or excited that they just watched a movie. And a lot of these people were dressed up very nicely, far more nicely than they would have been dressed to see a movie before the pandemic. And a number of these people also seem to be in, higher states of emotion. Like they were excited to go to the movies. They saw it as something special, maybe nostalgic. And it made an impression on them to see a movie in a setting with, a big screen, higher quality sound, and among, members of their community, rather, alone at home or with only a few members of friends or family at home. So I think that'll be interesting. But as I said, let me know in the chat if you've been to the movies recently or if it was long ago, and if you plan to go this weekend, because I'm certainly excited about it. Also, before we end today's discussion, let me know if there are any questions you'd like to ask me and the team at the American Center before we close out. And I'll stand by and read the chat while you guys put in your final comments and questions here. So Aline commenting again says, yes, on Facebook, that's quite strange to hear from a PR student, for a PR student like me, but I loathe social media for creating anxieties, nudging people to flaunt their lives. I agree. It's a double-edged sword, because yes, it does connect us on so many levels, but it does lead people to sort of show off. And if you're flipping through Instagram, for example, you see images of people presenting very positive aspects of their lives. Their photos or videos of them when they're at their best. They're on vacation, they're happy, they're posing in front of an expensive car. And these might present psychological problems for users, because users might feel kind of inadequate by comparison. You're seeing so much positivity all day, but you're viewing this from a more maybe banal or just mundane, normal setting. There's nothing wrong with that, but the contrast is something that can certainly present psychological challenges. Oh, someone is saying in the comments, let's see, that they watched Dune a couple of weeks ago. Very interesting. I'm familiar with I suppose it was the original adaptation of Dune by David Lynch, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. Maybe there is a new adaptation of Dune. I'm not aware. I think there is, but I'm not sure. Anyway, the old Dune, total classic, very wacky David Lynch film, as is sort of customary with Lynch. Aline comments again, says the last movie that I watched was Tenet 2020. Whoa, hey, Tenet was thrilling, right? It was kind of like Inception. It was a bit difficult to follow, but so well produced, such a mind-bending, interesting plot. Very, very cool movie. Someone, Anna comments that she was in the theater yesterday, but there weren't free seats. I suppose that's a good and a bad thing. I guess people are excited to be back in theaters. Hopefully people are staying healthy and able to feel kind of normal again, being among a lot of people, friends and family and members of the community back at theaters. But hopefully next time there are more seats and you get great seats in the theater. Someone comments, my phone is the big screen for me now. Very funny. Yeah, I think it's been that way for a lot of people over the past several months. Oh man, someone says that they were in a movie last time 5 years ago. That's impressive. You might have the record here for longest time away from the movies. Let's see. Last question, Blake, have you watched Squid Game? No, I have not. I've seen this, title Squid Game in a number of headlines or recommended things lately, but frankly, I have no idea what it is. I will circle back to you on that. But that looks like those are all the questions we have asked for today. So I've really enjoyed my time with you all. I'm so glad that you could join me at the American Center this evening to learn about America and current events and our culture. So thanks a lot for joining us. We hope to see you during our next discussion. We will communicate to you via various channels to communicate the time and how to access our next discussion. But please feel free to join us again and to invite your friends. The more participants, the better. So thanks again and have a great weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.